A little bit about timekeeping. This is, I talked about this after my example on Thursday. Timekeeping is important. And why do people go over time? One thing can be because of the adrenaline level. They're charged up, excited about what they have to say. Maybe they're really emotional about the subject, and it's very easy to think that what you're saying is more important than anything else in the whole world. Another thing is they want to say too much. And another thing can be they don't have a system to know when to stop. Now, interestingly enough, when I speak, I like to look at the clock when I start. And that gives me an idea. Thursday, I didn't do that. And I suddenly realised I actually didn't know how long I'd been speaking. And I knew that something about 9 o'clock, that's the limit. And so that's what was in my mind. But that isn't my normal practice. It's usually I like to look at the clock when I start and know about the time. So these things we learn as we go along, don't we? And it's good to be aware of them. Do be prepared to adjust your message. We spoke about this before, how it's not unusual that the other parts of the meeting can go on longer. Normally the message is at the end, and all sorts of things happen. So you have to be prepared to do that, and do come up with different ways to ensure good timekeeping. Now, there are some meetings and conferences that there's someone sitting on the front row, and literally you're preaching and then they will hold up a sign that says 10 minutes, 5 minutes, stop now. Can you imagine? Shut up, you know. Just try different things in this area. Find out what works for you. You know, it could be you have a friend who's at the back and they, you know, like this, 5 minutes, you know, or pointing to the watch. Because when I teach on an SBS class, often I get carried away. I would say to the school leader, please stop me when it's break time. Okay, I'm fine with that. Just help the students. You know, I know my weakness. Stop me. And we can, you know, hold your watch up or something. If you have a countdown, you've got on phones now, you can have these countdowns, can't you? So that's great to have that there. Just do whatever it takes. Just do work at this. And the reason is because if you don't stop, the chances are your audience will, and you can lose them. Every meeting has a traditional time to finish, and that's really important. I want to talk about overcoming fear, stage fright, or whatever to call it. How to overcome fear in public speaking. This is something that I have wrestled with. I remember when I was first on staff of SBS, working with Ron and Judy Smith, I would work hard for my lectures, do all my preparation, and I still remember the journey from where I was living to the classroom. And you got out the door, across some grass, and then up some steps. And I remember my prayer, my frequent prayer, as I was going to class to teach. And that was, oh God, please will you open up this ground and swallow me up. This was my frequent prayer. You know, thankfully God didn't answer it, you know. And there are those who don't struggle with this, but most people do. And the first thing to say is it's pretty universal. So that's not an absolute, but many people have different levels of struggling with the area of public speaking. There is an element where it can be good because you're a bit of adrenaline, you're on your edge and you're more alert and sharper. So it's not all bad. But the answer, I have the answer. Are you ready for this?
Yeah.
Yes.
Keep speaking. I got one of these little cartoons, and it has, the first picture is Saturday night, and the preacher is confident and bold as he's preparing the message, and then Sunday morning when he's kind of a little bit like this guy. But really, the answer is to keep speaking. And we will all grow into that area of that's really a comfort zone. We break through into that, and then depending on your personality, you can then find yourself in a different situation, and it can be all scary again. So you're used to talking to a group of about 30 people, and then you suddenly find you're speaking to 300 people. And so again, these things, what I want to say, can be really helpful. Just some practical things to help you know your material well. When I was going to preach at the wedding of Wilrins and Francesca, this couple that gave me the passage from Isaiah, I remember getting up in the morning, going out into the woods in Germany, and there was a tree stump, and that was my pulpit, and those trees got my sermon at least 3 times. Full on. I preached it to the trees just so I could go through it and be familiar with what I wanted to say. And there's times when I've stood up in my office and preached to the walls. It can help you going through your material. Know it well. Practice your presentation. Give special attention to the first 3 minutes. Because what you're doing is you're breaking through the sound barrier. You're getting going. And so give attention to know that really well to get you launched. I've talked about message notes. Have an easy to understand outline. It can be like a security blanket for you as you're getting through this. It can be really helpful. Try not to be anybody else. Know that your delivery style is okay. There may be voices telling you it's not, but it is. That's who you are. Anticipate potential problems. I've talked about knowing if you're going to walk on the podium, know how you're going to get there, make sure the microphone stand can be adjusted, the podium's in place, you're not going to trip over a cable, these kind of things. Manage your appearance so that you don't feel nervous all of a sudden because you have a gravy stain down the front of your shirt. You know, all these things can happen and throw you a little bit. Unfortunate things. Men, make sure that you've zipped up. It can be awkward and embarrassing. It's happened. But remember the promises of God. That is the most important thing. Remember that God is with you. God has called you to this. Remember that anointing. And one of the big things is love your audience. Remember, it's not about you. It's about them. And as you're praying, ask God to give you a love for your audience. There's this scripture, isn't there, that perfect love casts out fear. Love your audience. Be concerned about them. You want to serve them. And that can all help when it comes to ways to conquer fear. One of the things that we will come across is using a translator. Now, you have been a translator. Many of us have used translators. Have you been a translator? So you can jump up and speak into this from that particular side. But because we're so cross-cultural, the chances are we will find ourselves using a translator. And if it's appropriate, depending really on what you're speaking on, it can be really helpful to meet with a translator beforehand so that they have some idea of what you're going to say. Often if it's just a straightforward message, the translator knows what you're going to say anyway. I had this situation, this is a long time ago now, this is when Estonia was still under Soviet rule. I went with the team into Estonia and I was asked to teach on inductive Bible study, and we met in this house somewhere with these people. I can't remember them very well, but they were the translators, and I started teaching on inductive Bible study, and I found that they were getting quite stuck. And when we had a break, they came to me and they said, wow, this is more difficult to translate because you're using technical words. She said, we're used to people coming from America and we know what they're going to say before they say it. See, kind of, I don't know whether that was very kind or not, but that's what they said. In other words, there was kind of a message that they were used to, but I came along and we were talking about observation, interpretation, application, the whole inductive approach to Bible study, and they didn't quite know the words to use that would translate the terms accurately. And that was a lesson to me that at times we may need to talk with their translator so that they're able to know, especially if there's difficult words, so they can have the best word. Because when you're using a translator, we need to know that they're really important. Because we can talk all we like and no one will understand anything. And one of the things that's just a little bit troubling to me, and I've noticed this, is that when it comes to a situation when I need a translator, there's this nice posh podium for the speaker and the translator gets nothing. Or they have a little edge of your, or But when you have a translator, they're really important. And to do it well, you have two podiums. Two bottles of water, two microphones, and there needs to be an honour for that person who's translating. And so, depending on the situation and the circumstances, it may be, if you're the guest speaker, the chances are everybody knows a translator because they're part of the group. But if they don't, make sure you introduce your translator so that they are familiar with them and not just you. So kind of try to take charge. You have eye contact with your audience, of course, not your translator. And as you are listening to the translation, you sometimes can hear the translator faltering a little bit because they're trying to understand what you've said. And if that's the case, try to give a synonym or say what you mean slightly differently so that they're able to hear it from a different perspective. Don't just repeat the same thing. Try and say it differently so they're able to hear it, and then bring a translator. Now, whether you should speak in long sentences or short sentences depends on the language. There's been times when the translators turned to me and gone like this, shorter, But I've been in a different situation when I've tried to say things short and the translators looked at me and they can't translate it because I haven't given them enough. See? Now, let your translator tell you what they need. They have to be the one, of course, that determines what is needed. And so that is something that is useful. The other thing is if you can spend time with your translator first, depending on the circumstance, they may need to get used to your accent. One of the biggest problems I have is that I speak British English, and translators often know American English. And so I remember being in Togo preaching in this church, and this translator would just keep looking at me as much as to say, what on earth are you talking about? And the options for translators were very limited in that situation. I felt bad for her because I don't know how to speak differently, you know, and she was used to this, so we would try to make a little bit of fun of it, you know, to try and get through that. But if we were to have spent time together, it wasn't possible. If we had, then it would have been easier on her. Try not to have a time lag between the translator, and the translator ideally should mirror just the speaker just a little bit. What I think is unfortunate is if the translator sits down and has no expression. But that does happen sometimes. And the other thing that is really difficult is when the speaker talks over the translator. This is something that happens. The speaker is passionate, they're preaching away, they say something, the translator is translating, and before the translator is finished, they're speaking again. Have you experienced this? It's really difficult, huh?
It's very hard.
Yeah. You experienced that?
Yes.
So there we are. But the thing is, why would we do that when the people need the translation? It isn't actually logical. If people don't need the translation, then why are they translating? If they do need the translation, then what they're saying is equally as important as what you're saying. It's not any less important. You know, I'd say it's even more important, but of course they need you to know what to say. And so we need to understand the importance of the translator and give them that respect and that space so they can do a good job. The other thing, when you have an audience, and I don't know, English Korean is often what I do, people in the audience speak English, some of them, and if you tell a joke, what happens is people will laugh because they understand the English. If you're a translator, then you should kind of wait till that dies down. Otherwise, people won't hear the translation. and it's really, when you think about these things, it's really straightforward. What can we do so people can understand and they can hear? Because we want to serve people in this way. Have you guys got anything else? Or anybody? Any experience of this?
I would say avoid figure of speech. Even if it's necessary, then the speaker should give the definition of what it really means, because it is very difficult to translate figure of speech, or even the translator may not understand that as a figure of speech and will translate it literally, and that can be very funny.
Yeah.
This is really good stuff. Yes.
And I would say also for the speaker to avoid slang.
Yes.
Yeah, because
Yes.
this is again something the translator may not understand.
Yes.
Or know how to translate. They may understand it, but they may not know how to translate it. I mean, that's kind of...
I
Yes.
call the attention for the tone of your voice to be similar to the speaker, because when you translate, you like the speaker box of the speaker.
Yes.
Like I've been in situations that the speaker was in one tone and the translator was in another tone. It looks like the translator was the preacher. And vice versa. And vice versa. So being in another place that the speaker was very like hot, and then the translator was very calm. So it wasn't a match
Yes.
with what he was talking, the way the message was coming across.
Yeah.
I actually really like using a translator. It slows me down,
Yeah.
and I can think about the next thought that I'm going to say.
Yes.
And so sometimes I feel like when I talk with a translator, my points are much more powerful because I've thought through them, and then now I can say it.
Yes.
And also, the laughing thing is really frustrating because I'll say something, and then all of the people in English, like that can understand English, laugh, and then like he or she will say something, and they didn't hear it at all.
Yes.
So that's really frustrating. But I really enjoy translators actually.
Yes. I was speaking in Korea at the Businessman's SBS. They've got a wonderful work there, growing schools. And I had 2 different translators, and I was so grateful for them because we were able to spend time and talk together, and they were brought in. You know, I think they were paid money to come in and do the translation work, and they had translated my PowerPoints. And occasionally they would say, "Oh, I need to make a change on the PowerPoint. I haven't got that quite right," because now they've heard me teach, and they were able to correct it. But we're a bilingual, not bilingual, we're a multilingual organisation, and unlike the regular pastor that may be in the church, we do find that we have this. So let's try to do it well, huh?
I just get into a habit of using a simple language or try to use simple language and simple stories and keep it as simple as I possibly can. And of course my instructor in that is Joanna. She's often had to translate for me, and she's like, "Your message is so hard to translate," you know, and so that kind of it helps being, you know, through experience. My experience has always been that the simpler that I make it, the better.
Yes.
As simple and clear as possible.
Yeah. And that's good if it's a preaching. If it's a teaching, that may be more difficult.
We're paying a lot of attention to defining those words.
Yes.
You know, observation, what does the text say, you know?
Yeah, going through.
Interpretation, what does it mean, you know?
Yeah.
Kind of
Yeah.
really defining everything, you know?